A man was rushing through the airport to catch an important flight. He had his boarding pass in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. As he reached the security checkpoint, disaster struck. His suitcase locked jammed shut, and inside were all his travel documents. Frustrated, he tugged at it, shook it, and even tried kicking it. Nothing. Looking up, he muttered, "Please, somebody help me out here." A few minutes later, an older fellow wearing worn-out overalls and carrying a toolbox wandered over. "Having trouble?" he asked. "Yes," the traveler replied. "My flight leaves soon, and my suitcase is locked. Can you get it open?" The man smiled. "I can give it a try." He took a small piece of wire from his toolbox, bent it a little, and within seconds, click, the suitcase sprang open. The traveler was thrilled. "Thank goodness! You're a lifesaver." Then he added, "You must be some kind of expert locksmith." The old fellow laughed and said, "Actually, no. I just got released from jail yesterday. I was serving time for breaking into safes." The traveler grabbed his hand and shook it enthusiastically. "Wonderful!" The man blinked. "Wonderful?" "Yes," said the traveler. "Not only did help arrive, it arrived from a specialist." A man checks into a hotel and walks up to the front desk. "I'd like a room for the night," he says. "Certainly," replies the receptionist. "That'll be $2. $2? The man says in disbelief. He glances at a brochure and asks, "Okay, how much for the luxury suite with room service and breakfast?" $5. $5? That's unbelievable. The guest shakes his head and laughs. "I've got to meet the owner of this place." "Where is he?" The receptionist points toward the manager's office. "He's in there, with my husband." The guest raises an eyebrow. "What's he doing with your husband?" The receptionist sighs and says, "The same thing I'm doing to his hotel out here." An aging fisherman sat on a dock after a particularly rough season. His best friend, Leo, sat beside him offering support. The fisherman stared out at the water and said, "You know something, Leo? You've been there through every disaster I've ever had." Leo smiled warmly. "That's what friends are for." The fisherman continued, "When my boat engine died in the middle of the lake, you were there. When a storm destroyed my fishing nets, you were there. When I accidentally sank my first boat, you were there. When my second boat caught fire, you were there. And when I lost the big fishing tournament last year, you were there too." Leo nodded proudly. "Of course I was." The fisherman looked at him thoughtfully for a long moment. Then he sighed and said, "You know, Leo, I'm starting to think you're the problem." A young entrepreneur met a woman at a networking event. They spent the evening talking, laughing, and discovering they had a lot in common. Eventually, he invited her back to his apartment for coffee. As he gave her a tour, she noticed something unusual in his study. One entire wall was covered with trophies. There were 3 long shelves. The bottom shelf held small trophies. The middle shelf displayed medium-sized trophies. And the top shelf was packed with huge championship awards. Everything was arranged perfectly. She was impressed. For someone who seemed so relaxed and humble, he was clearly very competitive and successful. They sat and talked for hours. The conversation flowed effortlessly. The more she learned about him, the more she thought, "Wow, this guy could really be something special." As the evening came to an end, she finally stood up to leave. Before heading out the door, she smiled and asked, "So, be honest. How do you think our conversation went?" The man smiled, folded his arms, looked at the trophy wall, and said, "Help yourself to any prize. From the middle shelf." A farmer named Jack was competing in a county fair trivia challenge. He had already made it to the final round and was one question away from winning a brand new tractor. The announcer said, "You've used all your hints except one. Call a friend. Do you want to risk it for the grand prize?" Jack grinned. Of course. The final question appeared on the screen. Which of these animals does not build its own home? A. Beaver B, Rabbit C, Fox D, Hermit Crab. Jack frowned. I haven't got a clue. So he used his final hint and called his old friend Leo. Leo answered, and Jack quickly read him the question. Without even thinking, Leo replied, That one's easy, the hermit crab. Jack asked. You certain? Leo laughed. Absolutely. Jack gave the answer. The crowd fell silent. The announcer took a dramatic pause. The drumroll began. Then he shouted, Correct! You've just won a brand new tractor! The next day, Jack drove straight to Leo's farm. Leo, you've got to tell me, how did you know a hermit crab doesn't build its own home? Leo scratched his beard and replied, Oh, that's easy. Because it already comes with a shell. Jack owned a small antique shop and needed a painter to freshen up the place while he attended a trade show. Before leaving, he called the painter and said, I'll leave the side door unlocked. Just come in, paint the walls, leave your invoice on the desk, and I'll send payment when I get back. And don't worry about my cat, Whiskers. He's harmless. Then Jack became unusually serious. But whatever you do, do not argue with my pet monkey. Not for any reason. The next morning, the painter arrived. Sure enough, a huge orange cat was stretched across the counter, barely opening one eye as the painter entered. The monkey, however, was another story. From the moment the painter started working, the monkey followed him around. It mimicked his walk. It mocked his singing. It laughed every time he dropped a paintbrush. It even threw paper balls at him from across the room. For hours, the monkey kept it up. Finally, the painter lost his temper. He pointed at the monkey and yelled, You annoying little pest! Why don't you leave me alone? The monkey suddenly stopped. The shop became completely silent. The monkey slowly smiled and shouted, Get him, Whiskers! The giant cat instantly sprang off the counter and charged toward the painter. And that's why it's usually a good idea to follow instructions. Jack and Emma spent years dreaming of taking a luxury cruise around the world. Unfortunately, they never got the chance. After a bizarre mishap, they found themselves standing before a grand golden reception desk in the afterlife. A cheerful attendant greeted them. Welcome! Before you begin your eternal stay, is there anything you'd like to ask? Jack smiled and said, Well, we always wanted to take a world cruise together. Is there any chance we could do that here? Interesting question, said the attendant. Give me some time. Days passed. Then weeks. Finally, nearly 2 months later, the attendant returned. I have good news. We found a ship, assembled a crew, and arranged an endless luxury cruise just for you. Jack and Emma were thrilled. That's wonderful. Then Emma hesitated. Just one more question. Yes? Well, if we decide we don't like the cruise, can we get a refund? The attendant groaned, buried his face in his hands, and said, It took me nearly 2 months to find a cruise captain up here. Do you have any idea how long it'll take me to find a travel agent? A school principal was driving to work when he noticed a minibus packed with children still wearing soccer uniforms. Curious, he pulled the driver over and asked, Where are all these kids headed? The driver replied, I'm taking them on a school trip. The principal frowned. A school trip? During class hours? Yes, sir. The principal pointed down the road and said, Well, take them to the museum immediately. That's where educational trips belong. The driver nodded. Of course, sir. And off he went. The next morning, the principal was driving the same route when he spotted the same minibus. The same children were inside. But this time every kid was wearing souvenir hats and carrying ice cream cones. The principal quickly pulled the bus over. Wait a minute! I told you to take those children to the museum yesterday. Why are they all back in the bus? The driver grinned and said, Oh, I did take them to the museum. They had a fantastic time. Today, I'm taking them to the amusement park. An elderly gardener started noticing a strange smell coming from his garden shed. Every time he walked past it, something seemed off. Finally, he called his wife over and said, "Could you check the shed for me? I think something weird is growing in there." She opened the door, looked around, and suddenly exclaimed, "Oh my goodness! There are cabbages growing through the floorboards." Concerned, she scheduled a visit from a local agricultural expert. The next day, the gardener explained the situation. "My wife says cabbages are growing up through the floor of my shed." The expert nodded. "Let's go have a look." After a thorough inspection, the gardener anxiously asked, "Well, is she right? Are those really cabbages?" The expert folded his arms, sighed, and said, "Yes. And I'm afraid that's just the tip of the iceberg." A traveler walked into a busy hotel lobby and approached the manager. He smiled and said, "If I show you something you've never seen before, can I get a free room for the night?" The manager laughed. "Sure. This ought to be good." The traveler reached into his backpack and carefully pulled out a tiny hamster. Then he set down a miniature drum set. The hamster hopped onto the stool, twirled the drumsticks, and launched into an incredible drum solo. Guests gathered around in amazement. The manager was so impressed that he handed over a room key. Later, the traveler returned and said, "If I show you something even more amazing, can I stay free all week?" The manager crossed his arms. "If it's better than that hamster, you've got yourself a deal." The traveler nodded. He brought out the hamster and drum set again. Then he reached into his bag and produced a small goldfish in a glass bowl. The goldfish opened its mouth and began singing beautiful opera melodies. The hamster drummed. The goldfish sang. The entire lobby stood frozen in disbelief. Suddenly, a wealthy businessman rushed over. "I'll give you $20,000 for that singing fish." "Not interested," said the traveler. $40,000. "No. $75,000, right now." The traveler thought for a second. "Sold." The businessman happily carried away the fish. The hotel manager stared in shock. "Are you crazy? That fish could have made you a fortune." The traveler grinned and said, "Don't worry. The fish can't sing. The hamster's a ventriloquist." Here's a rethemed version that keeps the same joke structure and punchline logic while changing the setting, characters, and details. A man applies for a position at a large movie theater. During the interview, the manager asks, "Do you have any medical conditions we should know about?" The applicant replies, "Yes, I'm allergic to popcorn." The manager makes a note and continues, "Any physical limitations?" The man nods. "Well, years ago I worked at a construction site and had an accident. Let's just say I lost a couple of fingers." The manager looks sympathetic. "Understood. Well, congratulations, you're hired." "Great," says the applicant. "What are my working hours?" "Officially 9 to 5, says the manager. "But you don't need to come in until 11. The applicant looks confused. "Why would I start 2 hours late?" The manager chuckles and says, "Because this is a theater job. For the first 2 hours, everyone just stands around eating popcorn and counting on their fingers how much work they don't feel like doing. Since you can't do either one very well, there's really no reason for you to be here that early." A famous restaurant owner needed emergency surgery. The operation was complicated because he had an extremely rare blood type, and the hospital struggled to find a matching donor. After a long search, they finally located a frugal old farmer who was a perfect match. The farmer gladly donated blood. The surgery was a success. A week later, the restaurant owner sent the farmer a luxury pickup truck, an expensive watch, and a large check as a thank you gift. Several months later, complications arose and the owner needed another operation. Once again, the doctors called the same farmer. And once again, he generously agreed to donate blood. The second surgery went perfectly. A few days later, the farmer received a small envelope in the mail. Inside was a thank you note and a coupon for a free bowl of soup. The farmer couldn't believe it. He immediately called the restaurant owner. "After the first time, you sent me a truck, a watch, and a big check. This time I get a thank you note and a soup coupon?" The restaurant owner laughed and replied, "Well, after the second transfusion, I've got farmer's blood in me now." A university professor and an old fisherman find themselves sitting next to each other on a long train journey. The professor thinks, "This should be easy. I'll have a little fun." He turns to the fisherman and says, "How about a trivia challenge? I'll ask you a question. If you don't know the answer, you give me $10. Then you ask me a question. If I don't know the answer, I'll give you $1,000. The fisherman is tired and just wants a quiet ride, but he agrees. The professor starts. "What is the speed of light?" Without saying a word, the fisherman reaches into his pocket and hands over $10. Then he asks his question. "What animal has 6 legs while running uphill and 8 legs while running downhill?" The professor sits upright. He has no idea. He searches his phone. He checks science websites. He messages colleagues. He even calls a zoologist friend. Hours pass. Nothing. Finally, defeated, he hands the fisherman $1,000. The fisherman happily pockets the money and closes his eyes. But the professor can't let it go. He nudges him awake. "All right, I've got to know. What animal has 6 legs going uphill and 8 legs coming downhill?" The fisherman slowly opens one eye. He reaches into his wallet, hands the professor $10, and goes right back to sleep. So I was walking down the road one day when I saw an old man violently masturbating. He was cranking the hog so hard it had to hurt. I thought something bad was happening to him, so I ran over there to see if I could help. Seeing the crowd, his grandson runs out of the store and says, "Grandpa, you don't have to rub it in our faces. We know you can do it whenever you want to." Confused, I asked him, "What the hell do you mean?" He says to me, "Well, the doctor said he could have a stroke at any time." 2 old barn cats were prowling around a farmyard when they spotted a group of mice enjoying a picnic near a haystack. "Watch carefully, son," said the older cat. They quietly crept closer. "First, stroll past them where they can barely see us." The young cat did exactly that. The mice immediately became nervous. "Good," said the father. "Now walk past again, but this time make sure they get a really good look at you." The young cat obeyed. The mice started panicking and running in circles. "Perfect," said the father. "Now we go get our lunch." A few minutes later, after the meal was over, the young cat asked, "Dad, why didn't we just pounce on them right away? Why all the sneaking around first?" The old cat grinned and replied, "Because, son, they taste much better after you've scared the cheese out of them." One rainy season, a man and his wife were eating breakfast when a public service announcement came on television. The announcer said, "We're expecting heavy flooding today. Residents should move their trash bins to the north side of their property." Wanting to do the right thing, the wife grabbed her raincoat and moved the bins. The following week, another storm rolled in. Again, the announcement said, "More flooding is expected. This time, place your bins on the south side of your property." Out she went and moved them again. A week later, they were having breakfast when the weather report started. "We're expecting record rainfall today. Residents should place their bins on the..." Suddenly, the television went black. Power outage. The wife looked horrified. "Oh no! How am I supposed to know where to put the bins now?" Her husband took a sip of coffee, smiled, and said, "Dear, why don't we just leave them in the shed this time?" A young employee walked into his manager's office looking miserable. "Boss, I need to confess something," he said. "What happened?" asked the manager. The employee sighed. "A few weeks ago, I was working late at the office. Everyone had gone home, and a major snowstorm hit. I was stuck there with a coworker. We ended up chatting for hours, and before I knew it, we had agreed to start a business together. The manager nodded. Well, that's a risky decision, but not the end of the world. The employee wiped his eyes. But that's not all. A few days later, my retired neighbor asked for help cleaning out his garage. While I was there, another snowstorm rolled in. I got stuck for hours. One thing led to another, and I agreed to invest in his antique spoon collection. The manager frowned. Okay, that's definitely worse. The employee continued. And yesterday I stopped by a pet store just before closing time. A blizzard started, and I had to wait inside. A few hours later, I somehow agreed to buy 12 alpacas. The manager stared at him. 12 alpacas? The employee nodded miserably. Yes. What should I do? The manager jumped to his feet and pointed at the door. Well, you'd better get out of here before it starts snowing. 2 workers were employed on a cargo train traveling. A hotel manager woke up early one morning and started making his rounds. The first employee he passed looked at him and said, Rough start to the day, boss? The manager frowned but kept walking. A few minutes later, another employee smiled and said, Looks like somebody had a rough morning. Now he was irritated. As he continued through the hotel, 3 more staff members made similar comments. By this point, he was furious. He stormed into the owner's office. Before the owner could even speak, the manager shouted, Don't you dare tell me I'm having a rough morning! The owner blinked in confusion. I wasn't going to say that. Good! Snapped the manager. The owner pointed toward the manager's feet and said, I was just going to ask why you're wearing the mascot's giant clown shoes. Across the country. During a routine inspection, they opened one of the freight cars and discovered it was packed floor to ceiling with rubber ducks. Not ordinary ducks either. Every single one wore a tiny crown. One worker stared at the cargo and said, I don't think I can spend another week hauling thousands of royal ducks. The other nodded. Agreed. Let's quit. So they marched straight to the conductor's cabin. Sir, one of them said, we've decided to stop working. We'd like to get off at the next station. The conductor looked at them calmly and replied, I'm sorry, gentlemen. This isn't a train of thought. It's a dictatorship. A hotel manager woke up early one morning and started making his rounds. The first employee he passed looked at him and said, Rough start to the day, boss? The manager frowned but kept walking. A few minutes later, another employee smiled and said, Looks like somebody had a rough morning. Now he was irritated. As he continued through the hotel, 3 more staff members made similar comments. By this point, he was furious. He stormed into the owner's office. Before the owner could even speak, the manager shouted, Don't you dare tell me I'm having a rough morning! The owner blinked in confusion. I wasn't going to say that. Good! Snapped the manager. The owner pointed toward the manager's feet and said, I was just going to ask why you're wearing the mascot's giant clown shoes. A company owner decided to test his 3 managers to see which one was the most loyal. One afternoon, he took the first manager to a construction site. Without warning, he tossed his expensive briefcase into a muddy pit. The manager immediately climbed down, retrieved it, cleaned it off, and handed it back. The next morning, he arrived at work to find a brand new motorcycle in the parking lot with a note from the boss. A week later, the owner repeated the test with the second manager. Again, the briefcase went flying into the mud. Again, the manager jumped in and recovered it. The next day, he found a brand new sports car waiting for him. Attached was a note from the boss. Finally, it was the third manager's turn. The owner threw the briefcase into the pit and waited. The manager glanced at it, looked at the mud, shrugged, and walked away. The next morning, he arrived at work and found a luxury yacht brochure, keys to a beach house, and a large bonus check. Attached was a note that read, "From the boss's wife." 3 elderly gentlemen were sitting outside a retirement home on a sunny afternoon. A young man walked past them carrying groceries. One of the old men called out, "Hey! We bet we can guess your exact age." The young man laughed. "There's no way you can do that." One of the old men replied, "Sure we can. Just hold still for a moment, and let us take a good look at you." Confused but amused, the young man stood there as they studied him closely from head to toe. They nodded, whispered among themselves, and finally said in unison, "You're 28 years old." The young man's eyes widened. "What? How could you possibly know that?" The old men burst into laughter, slapping their knees. "Easy," one said. "We were at your birthday party yesterday." A man walks into a pub with his parrot perched on his shoulder. He sits down and says, "I'll have a pint of beer." Then he looks at the parrot and says, "What about you, Charlie?" The parrot immediately replies, "Whiskey neat, hold the ice." The bartender freezes. "There's no way that bird just spoke," he says. "You're pulling some kind of trick." The man shrugs. "Believe what you want. I'm just going to the restroom. Keep an eye on him. He's worth a small fortune." When the man returns, the parrot is gone. "Where's Charlie?" he shouts. The bartender replies, "I didn't believe he could talk, so I sent him to the corner shop to buy me a pack of cigarettes and a newspaper." Panicked, they search the whole neighborhood. Finally, they find the parrot in a back alley, completely surrounded by pigeons, looking exhausted but oddly satisfied. The man gasps, "Charlie! What are you doing? You've never acted like this before." The parrot flaps its wings and says, "First time I ever had money." A strict new physics professor, a retired engineer, started teaching at a notoriously unruly college class. On his very first day, he walked into the loudest lecture hall on campus, students shouting, throwing paper, completely ignoring him. They had already heard he used to work in aerospace engineering and were determined to test him. Without saying a word, the professor calmly opened his briefcase, pulled out a stack of papers, and placed them on the desk. Then he slowly walked to the whiteboard, wrote a complex equation, looked at the class, and said nothing. A student in the back yelled, "We don't do math, old man!" The professor calmly picked up a marker, and wrote a second, even more complicated equation. Still no reaction. The students grew louder, laughing and mocking him. The professor quietly walked back to his desk, opened his briefcase again, and placed a small printed notice on the front of the class. "Final exam, no retakes. Attendance is mandatory." Then he reached under the desk, pulled out a stapler, and stapled the exam schedule directly to the wooden podium. The room went completely silent. From that day on, nobody missed his class, nobody talked back, and nobody questioned him again. Later that week, a man went to the doctor and said, "Doctor, my wife is pregnant, but I always use protection. How is that possible?" The doctor nodded and said, "Let me tell you a story. There was once a lighthouse keeper who always checked his light every night. One evening, a storm knocked out all the power, but he still shone a flashlight out the window, signaling ships safely through the fog." The man frowned. "That doesn't explain anything." The doctor smiled. "Exactly. But the ships still arrived safely." It was a busy morning on the high street when I spotted a woman ahead of me drop her purse. Without hesitation, I picked it up and hurried after her. Just as I was about to tap her on the shoulder, she suddenly broke into a sprint, rushing to catch an approaching bus. "Hey! You dropped your purse!" I called out, but she didn't hear me. Determined, I ran after her, dodging pedestrians and waving the purse in the air. "Your purse! You dropped your—" Before I could reach her, she hopped onto the bus. Without thinking, I followed, breathless and panting as I made my way to the back where she had taken a seat. Finally, I caught my breath and blurted out, "You dropped your purse! Outside McDonald's. Her face lit up with gratitude. Oh my goodness! Thank you so much! Where is it? I blinked. I just told you, on the floor outside McDonald's.